Thanks. As Cowell said, I'm Ben Cowell. I'm a Regional Director for the National Trust in the East of England. And I come at this without any particular prior knowledge of this area or this field. Obviously, as an organisation, we're deeply engaged in digital work, but it's not the essence of what I do in my job, but I'm kind of very interested in this and interested in hearing the points that were made so far this morning. I suppose I'm also here with a National Trust hat, but also the Heritage Alliance, and in a moment Mark, who's been working on a fundraising project in the Alliance, will talk a bit about that, so I'm not going to cover so much of that, but I am going to flip between crowdsourcing and crowdfunding in the context of the National Trust. And I'm sort of one of these people who's kind of afflicted by a historical bent, so I can't help looking at over the long history of these things, these issues, and wondering to myself, kind of throwing out there for discussion, what is different about what we're talking about today to what has happened in the past. The National Trust is an organisation explicitly set up to be for everyone, and we have the word trust. The word trust was mentioned in the discussion just after the last session. The word trust was consciously put into our title because our founders knew they would only get money from people if they were trusted, and if they had the word trust in the organisation, it was more likely to raise funds. And actually, in our history, throughout our history, we've been raising small donations from lots of people all the time. So I think about the early days of the National Trust, and we were fundraising by rattling cans on the streets of Liverpool and Manchester to raise money to buy up bits of the Lake District. And this is written into our history. This is what we did. We also had other sorts of donations as well, of course. But so I'm kind of wondering about what's different about the situation now. 50 years ago, we launched a thing called Project Neptune, which was to raise funds for the coastline. It was our most successful fundraising campaign ever, raised millions of pounds, which we've used to buy up bits of coast. And I think just 5 or 6 years ago, we did a thing, fundraising from local communities to raise funds for the acquisition of Seaton de la Val in the northeast, which is the last big mansion property that we've got. So all this stuff happened before, I guess, the onset of the sorts of platforms we're talking about today. And I guess I'm questioning what is the difference the platforms make. And I'll just be really interested to hear what the difference is. I can see there would be huge differences in a much more kind of efficient system that was able to scoop up money or time from people that ordinarily there are barriers to getting. But I'm just wondering about that aspect of it. I suppose I'm also thinking about the other potential uses of the crowdsourcing type approach. We're an organisation that from time to time kind of effectively lobbies government for changes in public policy. And from time to time, we use the power of our supporters to reinforce the message. We did, again, this is a kind of pre-Twitter campaign we did, but in 2006, we ran a public campaign called History Matters with other partners. And I say pre-Twitter because there was not a huge digital aspect to that. Rather quaintly now, this is only 2006, but it involved encouraging people to send postcards to politicians to say why history mattered to them. And I think 10,000 people wrote a postcard and put a stamp on it. This is 2006. Feels like another world, doesn't it? And we had a thing called One Day in History, which I think was October the 17th, 2006. And I think 46,000 people wrote little essays about what they did that day, and the whole archive is now deposited in the British Library. And so this was stuff that we did before the digital platforms came along. And it was consciously part of the heritage sector's approach to building a lobby of support for the spending review that we were going through at the time, to try and demonstrate to politicians just how much support there was for history and heritage. So I'm kind of really interested in how we can use these platforms in a similar way in, I guess, what is a much more crowded marketplace for digital attention. And how do you grab that attention and really build something of scale? Because when you're talking about lobbying, you need the scale, you need the numbers of people to really have an impact at the higher levels. We are experimenting at the Trust with different sorts of models of crowdsourcing or in crowdfunding approaches. So we are celebrating our 50th anniversary of Neptune this year with a big thing about the coast. We're trying to engage people in what the coast is and why it matters to them. We've just done a thing called Sounds of Our Shores, where we were asking people to go out and record the sounds that they hear on the coast. And that's all been deposited in an archive. I think that's another collaboration with the British Library. That I think had 667 different submissions. It was recognising that on people's phones you've got sound recording functionality, and we were just taking advantage of that. Don't know where it leads to, but it's kind of a good way of engaging people. And clearly we have a spectrum of engagement or a supporter journey, if you like, from people visiting our places, to people becoming members of the Trust, to people doing things like Sounds of Our Shores, to people volunteering or leaving a legacy, all the different ways in which you can engage. And we want to kind of build that engagement, and I can well see the crowdsourcing approach being part of that. I suppose my other word of warning coming into the crowdfunding territory would be that we've tried, like others, it sounds like others have, we've tried lots of different ways of doing crowdfunding, different sorts of projects. My impression is, on the whole, these tend to fail quite often, I'm afraid to say. There's a property in Wales, which I won't name, but there's a property in Wales that was trying to raise funds to train volunteers. I think they only needed to raise £2,500 or something like that. But they launched a kind of crowdfunding scheme to try and get people to make contributions, small-scale contributions. It didn't really work. And maybe it's because the thing they were asking for was kind of complicated, or nobody really understood what it was that people were really giving their money to. Giving money to train volunteers? Don't get it. So I guess you have to be really clear about why you're asking for people's money. We've done other things where people have been able to text in order to make donations. This is quite a common thing for charities to do these days. Again, hasn't hugely been successful for the National Trust. So we are trying out these different methods. Sounds like everybody else is as well, and having to learn about how to do it best. Our fundraising strategy does put an increasing onus on low-level giving by lots and lots of people. So we're trying to find the best way to do that. I guess there's a question in my mind about whether that's best run centrally by the kind of national aspect, national bit of the National Trust, or whether it's done very locally as a kind of local fundraiser by properties, and how properties might engage with that. I suppose my only other thoughts in my head are about what the other applications of these sorts of approaches are, and thinking about the heritage sector as opposed to the museum sector, and thinking about all the different things that we need in the heritage sector. I think Historic England were trying something around buildings at risk for Grade 2 buildings, which is a project that's not yet been done, but I believe they were going for a kind of crowdsourcing approach to that. Lots of volunteers involved in monitoring what's happening to Grade 2 buildings. I could see, I've been involved in Victoria County History, where I live, and actually that's a model where we can't afford anymore to have paid members of staff often researching parish histories, but there's a lot of local history enthusiasts out there, as indeed there is a lot of family history enthusiasts. A lot of this has been done purely for self-interest, but in the future, what are the platforms that might help take that energy and that often very high quality sorts of research that go on in kind of local archives and county archives, and build a platform that would make that available to a broader group of people. So I think that's kind of interesting. And certainly in relation to volunteering, we want to find new ways of reaching out to get more voluntary support. As ever, we depend on our volunteers, and the only way we'll do that is if we can think of tasks that can be parcelled up and chopped up and fit into modern life as it's lived today. So, of course, there'll always be the traditional sorts of volunteering, the people that come and do a room guide on a Tuesday afternoon regularly, but actually fitting into family lives means finding little kind of gobbets of tasks that can be done at spare times in kind of busy, crowded family weeks. So we're looking really carefully at that, and I think that's potentially another area. That's it, I think, from me, but I'll hand over to Mark to talk about the Heritage Alliance.